Nós vivemos numa sociedade democrática.
Ainda por cima na sociedade em que vivemos.
Mas uma sociedade desigual é uma sociedade onde somos todos mais infelizes.
I don't want to live in a society.
Vivemos numa sociedade.
Nós vivemos numa sociedade.
Vivemos numa sociedade que vale a pena.
You know, we're living in a society.
Olá, bem-vindos ao Vivemos Numa Sociedade. Este episódio vai ser em inglês, porque temos um convidado muito especial, o Chris Wade. Ele é o produtor do podcast Chapo Trap House e está a fazer uma série muito interessante sobre a Guerra dos 30 anos chamada Hell on Earth, que podem ouvir no Patreon de Chapo Trap House. A entrevista vai ser em inglês, como eu disse. Estamos cá todos, eu, Guilherme, a Catarina, a Rita, o João. E pronto, espero que aturem o facto de não haver legendas num podcast. E espero que seja tão interessante para vocês como está a ser para nós. So, hi, Chris.
Hello, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I just did the intro in Portuguese. I hope I'm always curious how Portuguese sounds to foreign ears.
Well, like most Americans, if I have any exposure, like most Americans, I do not know any foreign languages because it's not necessary because ours is the real language of the world.
So
thanks
true.
to our continued global dominance. I tried to learn a little Spanish in high school. That's not true. I took Spanish for 8 years in high school and then tested into Spanish 1 in college, so I didn't retain any of it. And so to me, Portuguese sounds like silly Spanish.
That is that sounds about right. I had a friend of mine who told me it sounds like shtish, like a weird Russian, because we kind of eat our words.
Well, I appreciate you guys doing this in English because, as I just said, my Portuguese is not so good.
We were just about to test
Yet. Because you may become a digital nomad soon.
Yes.
We recommend.
Well, I was able to grasp the meaning of the name of your podcast when you sent it to me, so I can at least infer that much from my language studies.
Yeah, that can be our first question. Do you think we live in a society? I think it's...
Yes, as I was saying, as we were setting up, more and more every day, we seem to be living in a society.
Unfortunately.
Yes.
Not much of a choice, which kind of segues onto the reason why you're here. You are doing a very interesting podcast within a podcast,
Yes.
Hell on Earth, which is part of Chapo Trap House, well-known podcast. People can listen to it. Like the first episode's free, right?
First episode is free, and then the remaining episodes are on our Patreon, patreon.com/Chapo Trap House. They will be coming out weekly on Wednesdays, going forward for the next, I think, 12 weeks. I think basically until mid-March. And you can subscribe to listen there. All of our content, including the main feed Patreon episodes and all of this history miniseries, are there for just $5 a month.
Yeah, I don't think you necessarily need our advertisement, but we'll just link in case people are interested.
Always trying to break into foreign markets.
You know, we never know. You might get a huge audience here, and then you guys can come over and do a show.
I would love to.
Yeah, that would be amazing. So this podcast is not your first historical foray. You have done previously one called Hell of Presidents, which I thought was very interesting, about the like a full account of all the presidents of the United States. But this one is a European subject, so it's about the 30 Years' War, right?
Yes. So in 2022, I guess, we did the President's podcast, and that was me and Matt's, my co-hosts, first foray into historical podcasting. And as you said, we started out thinking that we were just going to kind of do goofy, funny biographies of the presidents, and then that project kind of grew into realizing that we were telling the entire history of America through the office of the presidency. And kind of while we were doing that, my producer brain was already searching for sequel series, and I, just out of boredom one day found myself reading up on the 30 Years' War in the 17th century in Germany, and all of these connections started getting made about all these relevancies to our current historical moment and all of these important factors in the development of the modern state and the development of our capitalist mode, the end of feudalism. And Matt and I started talking about it, and we kind of realized that we could do this project as kind of, if the story of America is the story of, a colonial backwater ascending to become the power on top of the world right now, this is kind of modernity origins. Plus it has a cool, gnarly war at the center of it, and, a lot of interesting characters and cool battles to get into. So yeah, that's how we started looking into it, and immediately started teasing out all these thematic resonances that we've been trying to underline with this project.
So as we record this, there are 3 episodes out. Mm-hmm. The first one's more about Martin Luther, and all the whole Protestant revolution, let's call it. Mm-hmm. But I find it, interesting from our perspective because Portugal is very much a periphery at this point. We were subject to Spain. There's a complicated history. The colonial decline of Portugal can be traced to this period as well.
You guys get a few mentions in the series.
We do. It's we always do the DiCaprio meme where we're pointing at the screen. Yeah. It's Portugal. Yeah, we do that. Get a little shout out. But I think what I thought was interesting, and you already touched upon that, was that there are some parallels between the current time and this particular period. Like in the first episode, you make an allusion to how the printing press kind of changed people's brains, and obviously you're also kind of talking about the internet, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So could you talk about a little bit about these parallels that you were finding out as you were recording and researching?
Yeah. So I'll start with that one because that when we started digging in. So when we thought about how we're going to approach the 30 Years of War, we thought about the context that we need to offer, and the whole series kind of starts very broad and then focuses in on just the 30 years of actual combat, and then broadens out again. But we thought to bring what we're trying to describe to lay audiences, we had to start with the Protestant Reformation, and we were looking into that. You kind of hear the first time you're going through history class, Gutenberg invented the printing press, and then suddenly there were books, and that was the thing. But one of the things that really stuck out as very interesting was how interrelated the rise of printing as an industry was to the Protestant Reformation, and it really, books were basically a luxury item before this, and it was really the demand for Luther's work, the popular demand for Luther's work, that spurred a viable printing industry, and suddenly people could read things in their own language that encouraged a different form of thinking. This explosion in both literacy and publication that accompanied this whole moment that really changed the way subjects related to their sovereigns, to the church. And that felt very, especially for the kind of things that we cover, our show, Chapo Trap House, has been, very interested in discussing phenomenons like QAnon here in the States, which seems very, very intimately related to suddenly a wide population having access to all this information and ability to communicate and organize with each other in brand new ways that kind of has this familiar feeling of the same people who were perhaps reading the Bible in a vernacular language for the first time, of being like, oh, suddenly I can read everything, and now I am the smartest person the world has ever seen. And I know the truth. And, I'm not directly one-to-one comparing, being able to read the Bible for the first time to coming up with QAnon-style conspiracies, but you will be surprised how many QAnon-style conspiracies pop up in this story.
How many do your own research?
Yes, exactly.
Type guys were there, right?
I mean, Martin Luther is effectively a do your own research type guy. I mean, that's what he is telling the people of Germany of hey, if you actually read this thing, nothing that the Catholic Church is saying is in it. You have to do your read yourself, form your own relationship. And then from there, going on into the 17th century, there is this general crisis that wraps up financial collapse spurred by, massive inflation from the Spanish pulling mountains of silver out of the New World and into the continent. There is climate change. During the 17th century, all of Europe goes through a little ice age that has numerous causes, some natural, like there is a recorded decline in sunspots at that time. Like the sun literally grew dimmer, which contributes to an overall feeling of apocalyptic thinking at the time. But there's also potentially anthropogenic causes of the climate change at this moment. It is theorized that European contact with the New World and the subsequent rapid, drastic depopulation through disease put a bunch of settled land and urbanized areas in the New World back into wild forestation, which caused a massive carbon sink, which had the opposite effect of what we're going through with global warming. So there's this climate change element that drastically affected the productive capacity of the European continent at this time. There's as I mentioned, the information revolution. There is also just this general calcification of the political class, a kind of organizational maximum of feudalism that led to this ruling class that found itself unable to respond to any of these crises in any effective way with the dynastic tools that they had on hand, and just a general feeling of apocalyptic thinking around the time that I think is more and more familiar to people of this day, and that's kind of one of the reasons, the emotional core of what we're trying to get at is that these people's apocalypse is similar to what we are feeling is our apocalypse.
I mean, definitely there are some parallels between, us having like constant news of this climate crisis and what people must have felt at the time, right? Where, you have like crop failures, you have some freak weather, you have,
suddenly it's snowing in August in Germany, stuff like that.
Right, exactly. So that's also very interesting. I had a sort of like a parallel question because I was wondering if you guys had any like references of like historical podcasts that you like. Oh,
yes. I mean, Matt and I both at this point listen almost exclusively to historical podcasts, the chief of which is the Just Wrapped Revolutions podcast by Mike Duncan.
It's so good.
He is. He is incredible. And that's like the chief one. If you want just hours and days of really stellar, really direct, informative narrative podcasting, he's the man. And then also Dan Carlin's Hardcore History, just in terms of dramatic storytelling, is one of the best. His episode on the Munster Rebellion was a big influence on this show, or inspiration for this show. That episode is called Prophets of Doom under Hardcore History. His older episodes are a little harder to find because I think he keeps them archived, but it's well worth searching out if you're into this history. Dan Carlin's Hardcore History, Prophets of Doom. And then also, I would say, Dave Anthony's The Dollop, if anybody's ever heard of that, which is a podcast by a comedian friend of ours named Dave Anthony, who's been a stand-up for a long time, that basically each episode is him telling a weird, bizarre, dramatic story of American history to his friend who is another stand-up comedian, and the friend just doesn't know it and jokes about it. And in terms of like tone and taking kind of a humorous and sarcastic, a little bit of a humorous and sarcastic look, The Dollop by Dave Anthony is a big influence of mine. And that also has like a billion episodes, and they're all really funny.
Right. Yeah, I can definitely hear that.
Chris, hi.
Hi.
Let's go back to the parallels you were talking about. You probably know that in 1640, Portugal broke away from Spain.
Yes. We discussed that
the printing press
show eventually.
Yeah, and the printing press was very, very, very important for war propaganda, and especially fake news, because Portugal was fighting that war for 26 years. We actually celebrate the year, the day, the first day, the day of the supposed revolution, which then the war took another 28 years to finish.
Now remind me, is that the day that Braganza and the conspirators assassinate?
It was the conspirators, yeah.
Assassinate the whatever you call it, the governor of
Viceroy,
Portugal. Viceroy, yes.
Yeah, the Braganza was far away from Lisbon. He was took by surprise.
Yeah.
So I was wanting to ask is that did you find in your research war propaganda and or fake news, because you get a lot of that during the Portuguese-Spanish War, and written in various languages, in Latin, in Catalan, in French. So Portugal was exporting basically war propaganda and fake news to try and justify its independence.
Yes. I mean, one of the most fascinating things that I saw about this is the idea that even within the first generation of these religious wars, back in the 1530s, there was mobile printing presses that the various generals and dukes and leaders would take on campaign with them, so that at the moment of victory, they could be starting to churn out broadsheets and pamphlets describing their smashing victories to everyone else around them. And yeah, throughout all of this, the printing press is both a tool of genuine information spread, but also, from the beginning, a tool of orienting people around ideological camps. And largely at first, these start with confessional camps and the Protestant-Catholic divide, but as this goes on, the ideological orientations of Protestant and Catholic end up being subsumed through the course of this war into more political projects. And I'm trying to find right now, because in one of the last episodes, Matt literally refers to something that's coming out as a early example of classic fake news media. But I don't have it off the top of my head. But certainly, at every moment throughout this story, you should be imagining a low-key press war happening underneath all the events going on.
There's like the herrings and the battle in the sky. I mean, that's like religious. So
that's
controversial. Well, if it's
there's a small industry of prophetic writing going on where everybody is attempting to interpret signs from above. When we get to England, which is where the series ends up, because after we conclude the Peace of Westphalia, we hop over to England and talk about the English Civil War up to the Glorious Revolution, and there. One of the key factors going on throughout this conflict that is the largely Puritan, Calvinist, merchant class against the more Anglican or even crypto-Catholic king is this fear, this almost Red Scare-like panic of crypto-Catholicism within England. And certainly by the 1640s, recusant Catholics are a small minority of the English population, and yet there's this massive paranoid printing industry that is at all times churning out these tracts about how there are these cells of crypto-Catholics who at any moment are ready to activate and surround London and take it and burn the godly Puritans. And I remember the one thing Matt was referencing is tracts defaming the Catholic rebels in Ireland, claiming that the amount of murdered Protestants in Ireland was hundreds of thousands of people, when that was 5-10 times the amount of Protestants that were even living in Ireland at the time. So yeah, that was the most recent example from the last episode that we recorded of a classic early example of the lie and fake news media ginning up violent paranoia against a minority group who's simultaneously posed to be destroyed and also posed to emerge from hiding and destroy the people in power.
Right, and there's like an incentive that goes with that, right? Like printing this stuff just becomes this huge industry at the same time. So there's like very quickly you get into sensationalism and all of that.
Yeah.
But I was just wondering, because you mentioned Mike Duncan. I also listened to that one, and it's interesting for me that you kind of see his ideological perspectives change during the podcast, especially with Haiti.
Yes.
And he mentions that as well, right? But in the end, if you listen to that, he kind of goes through what he thinks kind of makes a revolution. And, he talks about having a dissatisfied slice of the elite or the ruling class that kind of gins up some grievances to try and, get themselves a share of power, right?
Yes.
And what I think is interesting is it's almost like this Wizard's Apprentice type thing where they end up, you talk about the Anabaptists at the beginning,
Yes.
right? So like I always find that interesting because in all these societies and these revolutions, you have these proto communists, if you want to call
Yes.
them, like the levelers and the diggers, and
Yes,
like
exactly.
you have all these phenomena. But like, did you find a lot of these cases?
Well, there's certainly throughout all this time a more radical edge of the Reformation that is constantly being dealt with. I get through
Right.
with the 30 Years' War. We are really looking at, a princely revolt against an imperial top that's happening in Germany, and a lot of the action there is mostly around these, lesser nobles attempting to assert their privileges in the face of a failing, essentially, feudal overlord, and that's why we talk about Portugal in the 1640s. That happens in our That's how we start our Westphalia episode with the Reapers' War in Catalan, in which you do see something interesting like this, where what starts as a rebellion of laborers becomes kind of a cross-class rebellion, uniting everyone from lesser nobles to, the ascending bourgeois down to the workers against this imposition of, the Habsburg center rule over Catalan, to extract resources, men, money, taxes, to fight this ever-going war in Germany that they have no part of. And then also at the same time, that is when the nobles of Portugal also try to assert and eventually successfully assert their independence from Spain, along the same grounds as the German princes are trying to assert their independence from the Austrian Habsburgs. So, the real push and pull of this era in the main story is really between these centralizing dynasties attempting to assert what is going to eventually become what we can really imagine as a state in the modern sense, against the centrifugal pull of these, nobles in the more feudal sense that creates this conflict. I was just talking about this on the last show that I was on. Real on the ground, like levelers and diggers stuff, real peasant revolts around this time, of which there are many throughout this entire story, from the beginning of the Reformation up through, there's a revolt in Sweden in the 1650s, and the Glorious Revolution, which we end at, isn't really a peasant revolt, but all through this era.
Yeah.
There are tons of these peasant revolts, but they tend to be small and or unable to cohere into something larger, partially because there isn't a really ideological framework to build something out of other than general dissatisfaction. And then I would also argue that it really is, access to the information technology, like the Reformation, and then eventually the ideological framework for the 30 Years' War revolt of the princes is really spread through these printed materials, which are largely urban-based and spread between an increasingly democratized but still, at least somewhat higher class elite. And, there's just no way to coordinate in a large-scale peasant revolt when, the fastest that you can travel information is like one guy on a horse, or like perhaps a particularly radical itinerant preacher or something like that.
Right. It's kind of hard to do these, mass revolutions when you're atomized in that feudal sense, right? But this just made me think that, for instance, Matt has, read and talked about Dawn of Everything, and there's like this strain of, I'd call it like leftist like reappraisals of history, right? And I think it's kind of tempting for leftists because we're now at a point, like after the fall of the Soviet Union and everything else, we're kind of at a point where we're kind of looking back and trying to figure out, maybe where did it all go wrong or something. And like we have this like, neoliberal hegemony or something. Do you think like there's an aspect of that when you're doing this, where you're looking at the origins of capitalism, trying to figure out like what are the hinge points?
I mean, we literally, Chapo literally has a series called Hinge Points where we try to look at the important moments and see, just discuss from a historical perspective, things could go a different way. I think with this series, at least from my end, what I'm trying to do is just describe an interesting time period in history and try to do the best that we can, making sense of it through our particular material lens. And one of the things that is both difficult as a storyteller, but also, I'm hoping that we do a good job with, is that with the 30 Years' War, there's not really good guys or bad guys in a historical sense. Typically, when you're trying to do pop left history, you want to find your revolutionaries and your broad groups of workers or laborers or the oppressed, and identify and root for them. But this really is like a group of lesser princes against greater princes. And I think that the thing that we're trying to get at is that the backdrop for why this happens and how this happens and the process that these are going through is very much inflected by not just guys doing stuff, but a material reason that things are happening. These economic conditions that they find themselves in, the declining mode of production that they are sitting on top of, that they don't even know is declining. They can't know because they're living inside of it, coupled with these things that are interpreted at the time as largely signs and wonders. Things like suddenly it's colder, and suddenly your crops are failing, and suddenly you can't plant as high an altitude as you can anymore because the sun's getting dimmer.
The vibe's off.
The vibe is off, and they don't really know how, and yet they must continue moving through their moment in history. And so, we just want to go about this story by like saying what happened, but then also trying to, for a modern audience, put a material context around it and kind of show how history and the actions of people in it are shaped by and projected forward by the material forces around them. And often we see throughout this, the individuals who are able to triumph are the ones who are able to, for a time, flow with history rather than sit against it or try to prop up a decaying order or something with that.
Right. And it's interesting that is a parallel with our times, right? Like we do still have in almost every country like these national reactionaries or capital, that they kind of have this pseudo-populist thing against global capital, right? So, you still have your princes and your imperial forces.
Yes.
It's just a different dynamic. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
I think I'd like to talk a bit about like like current politics.
Sure.
Like I think it's like interesting. Like Chapo is such a big phenomena, right? Like in the kind of starting with the Bernie campaign, and then now we're kind of in a post like two Bernie campaigns. Like, is it like, how do you feel that the vibe has shifted, right? Like,
yes. I think we are in we at Chapo Co. are in a constant, search for how to adapt to the vibe. I mean, definitely the era of the two Bernie campaigns, felt like there was a palpable chance for something different. And, we felt not only enthused and motivated by it, but also that it was to be moved by the moment of history. We needed to follow it and push for it as much. And, I think that we would all say that that moment has, for the time, passed, and it is a little difficult to figure out what the project should be now. And I think many of our detractors would, or even other of our friends, on the left in the States, might say, that there is a pessimism to that or a doomerism to that. I personally would call it more of a wait and see mentality, that, especially doing these two history projects, like moments of contingency can arise very quickly and things can move very fast if you are waiting for your right moment to take a shot. And I know that this is all, very vague terms, but, I'm thinking about it in the sense of the two Bernie campaigns, is that the thing about those campaigns that made it a moment of possibility here is Bernie allowed a very big tent organization on the left, something that was broadly agreeable to almost anyone who considers themselves a leftist in America, no matter what brings you there specifically. Right. And that was the moment of opportunity there. So now we're kind of in a holding pattern of just making fun of doddering old Biden and ridiculous Trump, and just kind of observing the inherent absurdity of our political situation. But I'm also constantly heartened and trying to highlight on the show things that I think are possible. The certain moment of increased interest in labor participation in the States, certainly the greatest it's ever been in my lifetime, even if it is still minuscule compared to even a generation before I was born. There's an awareness of the power represented in that. Even if it's people trying to organize individual Starbucks, to people being more and more aware of, our train and locomotive unions, even if the last thing that, the last reason they were in the news was vaguely a defeat for them. That is more than I've heard about locomotive unions in the States than in my lifetime. So just that general awareness is something to I think, orient around. I mean, to me, that is where the future lies, is hopefully a newly militant labor force in America, of which I will have to say I will be mostly an observer of. I work in a independent media company of 4 people. There's not much I can do to participate, but I can certainly try to highlight it when it is around.
So, news from Portugal.
Yes.
Not that you've not heard of them, because according to our mayor, Lisbon is the center of the world, so you're probably very much aware of this. But our mayor, called Carlos Moedas, or as you may call him, Charles Coins, has been going through a lot with the church recently. We are paying 4 million euros for a stage for the Pope. Yeah. What do you think of this?
So the Pope is visiting Lisbon, and the mayor
because
has
we're the center of the world, pretty much.
Well, I mean, see, this is where I would have to ask, like, how much of state interaction with Catholicism is still like a live issue in Portugal. Like, certainly in the States, religious topics inflect our politics, but it tends to be in a very craven culture war-y way, where it's mostly just red meat for a certain subset of our population, and there truly isn't that much state interaction with the church here. So I imagine, sitting here in the 21st century, 2023, there must be a big generational divide in Portugal between people who are like, yes, it is totally appropriate for the state to be shilling out money for a state visit to the Pope, and people who are like, do not let that guy in the country, we don't care.
So basically like that.
Yeah.
The
Vatican said that
a big division.
The Vatican said that.
Yeah. So today the Vatican said, the mayor of Lisbon,
Charles Coins,
he had the Vatican say that they had nothing to do with the project, which will cost more than 80 million euros. The altar is just 4.2.
Yeah.
But the total is 80.
And
How long
Charles
is this
Coins-
visit? Is he setting up shop here?
This is
like
these
3
are
days.
He's gonna move, probably.
yeah. This is like a yearly event about like Catholic youths going to some place and like the Pope will be there.
Oh, okay,
doing a
so
huge
this is
mass.
like the Catholic Olympics or something. So that
Yeah,
this is
something
like
like that. But instead of
Pope on tour.
sports,
Yeah.
the kids, the Catholic kids, they come to smoke weed and do sex before marriage. Things like that.
Yeah.
It's- lots of
Boy
Scouts,
Scouts yeah.
Scouts
Well,
and Girl Scouts,
yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, they have a very, I don't know how it is in the United States, but it's a very religious thing. Like Scouts are a very religious thing.
okay,
in
yeah,
Portugal.
yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Fascist and religious.
Yes, also like we had like a Hitler Youth thing, and they're kind of the descendants from that. So.
Yeah, we do. Yes, I mean,
Probably have to
same
cut this
here.
part
I
out.
remember the like honestly, we had a German Bund in America as well. That was like a very much a thing until that whole business in the 40s. But you know, I will
what
say,
happened? Yeah.
there we have a kind of parallel type thing here, which is that our mayor, Eric Adams, here in New York City, just put in a bid to host the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, here in New York in 2024, which would also be of a huge cost to the taxpayers. That is a nationwide convention of every important Democratic official. It is the launch point for whoever is running for president here. And he has framed it as we are going, we're asserting New York's position as like the crown jewel in the Democratic alliance, but it's pretty obvious to anybody who looks that Mr. Adams is trying to assert his position as a potential future national Democratic candidate. So I don't know how it works with the mayor of Lisbon, but at least here in New York, the mayor basically exists to be a punching bag for all of the citizens of the city. You basically take that job so everybody can yell at you.
The
That's the problem.
village idiot.
Yeah,
I
the
guess.
dunk tank clown.
Yeah.
Charles Coins had no idea what he was up to because I think everyone, even himself, thought that he was going to lose.
Mhm.
Yeah.
He
was-
campaigned
yeah.
saying he would make a unicorn factory in Lisbon.
Okay.
This is true. So this is like one of those bullshit startup things.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
But we call them unicorns, so it's like a unicorn factory. And this was an
so
actual
so like
campaign
an
promise.
incubator for like tech startups.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But he's basically his whole platform is just some minor tax cuts. We have like municipal taxes, some minor tax cuts, and
Basically giving back taxes
to the people who earn
so
the most.
the
Basically, yes.
the ones who paid the most taxes got
Okay. So would
those
you
taxes
so
in
would you
return.
describe his orientation as conservative? Again, it's difficult
He's just
Yeah.
interfacing
So-
like this because
okay,
we just
so I
have
think-
the two, and I'm sure
yeah.
you guys have like 10.
So I think this is a fun game, which
Yeah,
we'll
like
say
that.
the name of a party, and
Okay.
you'll try to ask their political, try to guess their political alignment.
Yes. Well,
Right?
I can say anything that has the word "peoples" in it is either hard left or hard right.
we do have one. It
It's
used to be
not
the
hard.
Popular Party, the Democratic Center, Social Center. That's one.
People
Democratic
parties.
Social.
Yes,
I'm going
yes.
to think Democratic Social Center. I'm going to guess that's like your Democrats Neolib party.
They did
almost
have
there.
that strain, but so like conservative religious rightish
like
Okay.
Catholic.
right?
Okay, right
Um,
Catholic as opposed to
yes.
populist Catholic.
So
but like posh.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Bourgeois.
Yes, so like almost aristocratic, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So we have a social democratic party.
Okay, so I'm going to guess that's your center left party.
No.
That is our center right party, ironically, right?
A
So
liberal initiative.
Yes.
They don't even put the word party in the name. It's just a liberal initiative.
Okay.
I'm giving tips here.
Okay. Liberal Initiative.
Oh.
Is that the center left party? Do you have a
They
center
say
left
they're
party? I'm
opposite.
just going to
we
say
do
center
have we do.
They're not.
yeah.
They say they're not left or right, so they're obviously right.
Okay,
But
yes,
they're-
exactly.
they have,
Well, it works.
like-
It works the exact same way here. Anybody who says I'm neither left
Yeah.
nor right is absolutely a right winger.
They have they call themselves liberal, but they have that also that that shtick in right wing media where we're actually classical liberals.
Yes, exactly.
You know that one?
They're liberal in the Adam Smith sense, which means that the only thing that matters politically is ownership, and we will literally kill everyone to defend it.
Yes, except they for some reason love landlords, unlike Adam Smith.
Mm-hmm.
And the U.S.
Yeah, and the U.S. They do love the U.S. So we have one called Enough.
Enough.
It has an exclamation part. It's Shiga. It's a interjection.
Let me go with, given the international stylings of these types of people, is that kind of your Green Party? Like a...
It is not. It is a... so our Green Party is actually... We have more than one. We have one called the Greens. So
okay,
that would be
that's obvious,
easy,
yes.
Yeah. And those generally run in a coalition with the Communist Party.
Okay.
And there's another one, which is probably the funniest name we have. It's called People, Animals, and Nature.
Okay, so I'm going to guess, based on the rest of this game, that is not a Green Party.
That one is.
Oh,
a
that's
Green
the other
Party.
Green Party. Okay,
but
Is
it's more focused on like animals' rights and stuff like that.
Okay.
Pets and populism.
The thing is, we have
rights.
this group in Portugal that supports pets and animals and are neo-Nazis at the same time.
And they're called IRA.
they're like one of the bad IRAs.
That's an amazing type that.
And so they go from this party pen to Enough.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And they're in between. They're not. Am I far right? Am I green? Both.
Yeah, so we didn't actually say it. Enough is the far right party.
Okay.
Like the dictatorship was good actually, folks.
I mean that totally makes sense because as William F. Buckley said here, conservatism is standing athwart history and saying stop. They're saying enough. We've had enough history. We're going to stop it here, and in fact roll it back.
Well, that's pretty much it.
Yeah,
that's
spot on.
they're very shady. I would say I'm being nice. I
Oh,
guess.
and by the way, Charles Coins.
Mm-hmm.
Which of these parties would you say he's from?
We didn't even say any left parties. So just to clarify, there is a socialist party.
Okay.
They are, I would call them generously, they're like social liberals, so they are center left, but very economically very
Right.
to the right, I would say. Not very, but enough.
Yeah.
There's some space to the right? There's a lot of space to the right.
Mm-hmm.
And the two main left parties are the Communist Party, the Portuguese Communist Party, and the Left Bloc, which is they are like three Trotskyist offshoots that kind of made a party, and they're kind of more culture war-y left type, right?
You've just alienated like 50% of our island.
Well, they care about workers as well, but they talk about these issues more, right? And we have also another called Free Livre, right? That's kind of a more like green.
Euro-socialist.
Left libertarian, like in the classical sense.
But you get a lot to choose.
Right. So
Do you remember which of these parties is the one?
So we have the Social Democratic Party, we have the Center Party, we have Enough, we have the Liberal Initiative, we have Socialist Party, we have.
So this guy
is Coins Liberal Initiative.
He could be.
Okay.
The politics
I'm going to call
that
good enough for
yes.
me.
Yeah. He's actually from the. He's kind of a Kamala Harris figure because his father was a Marxist.
Okay.
And he worked for Goldman Sachs.
And then he worked for Goldman Sachs. So yeah, that was.
He's a technocrat.
Yes,
exactly.
Now
he is from the
Social Democratic Party,
now,
which is
makes a lot of
terribly
sense.
named.
From the way you describe this guy, is he part of the how to describe this? The growing
Illuminati?
The growing international coalition of I would say swaggering buffoons. You know what I'm talking about, from your Berlusconi to your Boris Johnson to your.
No,
to your
he doesn't
Trump.
have the charisma though.
Okay.
He doesn't. He's more of.
He sounds like Kermit the Frog.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's not even a short king. He's a manlet.
Yeah, he's not. So he doesn't have that charisma, right? To qualify. He does lose his temper a lot in municipal audiences where he'll say stuff like, when he's arguing the left, he'll say stuff like, you guys were born pure. Look at these guys; they're so pure. They've never done anything wrong. They'll just have these hissy fits.
I mean, those are the arguments that happen everywhere. Is when you would try to point out like, oh, hey, look at all these fixable injustices that could be like very
Exactly.
very directly confronted with even a modicum of of commitment to a certain ideological or value structure. You are immediately met with, you don't understand the reality of negotiation and triangulating between constituencies and shareholders. You love hearing about shareholders, which really just means you're not paying us.
Exactly.
So maybe we should run what's been happening in Lisbon with Charles Coins, culminating in the Vatican saying we have nothing to do with this guy.
Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, he started a war on the people whose work is to take the garbage out of the streets.
Okay.
So the streets were flooded with garbage for weeks.
So is that a like a union dispute, or are the sanitation workers, as we would call them, like a big union block in the city?
They are municipal workers, so they like all public workers.
And so the mayor said that these strikes were politically motivated.
Right.
So that's wrong.
Mm-hmm. In Lisbon,
can you think of a strike being politically motivated? Like
imagine.
Imagine. Yeah.
Yes, wanting a enough wage to live on. That's too political.
Exactly.
So are all your municipal workers, like, are your cops and your sanitation workers in like the same labor block there?
No, like we have the kind of like, I wouldn't say exactly the same issue with police unions, but they are still, they're all like public workers, but they are like in separate unions.
It's also, there's like 20 different police unions.
Yeah,
all hate one another.
Yes.
Well, great. You at least they can fight among
themselves. And they're filled with
neo-Nazis
and other sorts of.
Oh yeah, we have that. So like there are some guys who are like aligned with the cops that are aligned with the enough.
Yes. That makes sense.
Yeah. They do the like their symbol, like they're like called the zero movement. So they do the
okay?
The okay sign.
Great.
It's great. So you know how like we get a lot of like secondhand America stuff.
Yes.
Like everywhere else, really.
I will say an anecdote just talking about international trading international political stories is when we were in tour when Chapo was on tour in the UK, we'd be talking to all these like hardcore labor guys in the UK who I love talking with and hearing about what their struggles and what they're working on, but they would all have deep knowledge of American politics down to like minor senatorial or representative elections. And I eventually just like asked one of these guys in Manchester, like, why, how, I get knowing about America because again, we're like the dominant force in the world, but how do you know so much about American politics? And this guy was like, well, if you follow politics, America's like the Premier League. You can pay attention to your regional leagues, but you really want to see what's going on, in the majors. I
mean, it's really interesting how like especially like a lot of the alt-right stuff eventually does come like you can almost like set your clock to the like 6-week delay that it takes for certain issues. Now it's like the United States has a lot of like trans moral panic stuff.
Yes.
Now it's coming here as well.
Yeah, I mean,
like
that must be especially frustrating on an international level because so many American culture war things are so deeply rooted in American psychoses, neuroses about sex and gender. Well, I mean, that happens all over the world, but that is something like very specifically and intentionally brewed up by a very small subset of American cultural conservatives because they think that it will be a winning wedge issue in like the American formation of culture. And then, it's like just like all pop culture, it somehow gets exported and just I imagine the frustration of being like, oh God, now we have to argue about this.
Yeah, but
exactly. You're already so tired of hearing this from the U.S. and then you have to 2 years after go through the same thing, go through the same arguments, and it's just so tiring.
Yeah.
It's kind of like having the gift of foresight in a way, right? Like you'll see this happen, like this is our future, like 2 years from now or 6 weeks or
at least
whatever,
it gives you some time to prep.
It's true. Like we're basically just going through the same motions, like having the same arguments in like our opinion columnists and the exact same arguments that you would see on American media. Like you will see them just regurgitated.
Yeah.
And,
That's why Charles Coins wants to bridge the gap. He has more stuff that he wants to do.
Yeah, he wants to
bring a
try
lot of
new stuff.
He wants to innovate new culture wars.
Yes.
Well, hey,
no, he
at
wants
least it's
the
some new
culture
material.
wars to start here by incentivating the Americans to come live here.
Yeah, it's true. We do have a lot of Americans
digital nomads, not paying tax or paying very low tax. So in that way, we can start the new cultural wars here.
So
and export them from
draft
here.
them like
if we have the Americans here, we can start them here.
Ever since I watched Friends, I want an American landlord. I want to pay my rent to an American.
I mean, Friends is a hilarious depiction of New York apartment living.
Huge apartments.
You can see my
no
entire
rents.
apartment in the back of this, and I'm doing pretty well here, and I have this studio. So you mentioned the digital nomads a few times, and I guess I'd be interested in talking to that because living here, I know a number of American expats who have decamped. More for Spain has been very popular. Berlin, Germany has been very popular, but I understand that Lisbon and Portugal are very, from a government level, are very active in attracting people, and how can you blame us? Because it is wildly expensive to live here and nothing functions properly. So it is an attractive deal for us. And I sense some frustration on it, but it's also like, I mean, it's just like gentrification in neighborhoods here. Yeah. It's a process that is beyond any individual's, blame, even if the aggregate effect of it is negative to the people already living there. So to tell me a little bit about the digital nomad and the influx of expats.
There's like a very specific brand of TikToks where they're talking about the cost of living in Lisbon, and this is like, what does a banana cost, Michael? 10.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like the kind of like they'll say we'll spend 1,000 euros on rent, we'll spend like 2,000 euros on groceries, and meanwhile people are like, the average wage in Portugal is like 1,000 euros, right? So and rents are obviously, because if you can just evict someone, you can exchange, like you can change one rent from 500 euros to 1,500, and the guy that comes from America is going to be like, this is so much cheaper, right? 1,500 euros, that's nothing, right?
Yeah, especially if they can still be working for their American job.
They're just generally
I
working
think
from
we
outside.
should know that this has been a process for the past 10, 12
Yeah,
years.
this is a long process,
It
right?
started with tourism, and then there was this law that was basically liberalized rents in Lisbon. Rents that were
made some evictions easier and
exactly
stuff like that.
And
there was a lot of like really old buildings would have rent control, and then people would be like, "Oh, we're gonna pretend this old lady didn't die for 10 years because the rent's really good."
Right.
There's a lot of like stories from just people trying to hold on to these 50 euro, 150 euro rents, and when you're getting like a 300 euro pension, that
goes a long way.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. It's a big difference.
Yeah. After we had like the center of Lisbon turned into like Disneyland, Charles Coyne said, we need more of this.
Yes, more please.
More brunch places, more like co-working spaces, and tax breaks for
crypto.
Of course,
yeah, we do have those.
Yeah,
we pay zero crypto tax.
I mean, it's interesting. I'm sure that process feels different specifically in a very, very old city like Lisbon, but it is funny how universal that is. We've been lucky enough to tour a lot through the United States and go to a bunch of different cities, and I would say, it's great to meet all the people who live across the country, but one of the most depressing things about it is seeing more and more how much every urban area is looking exactly the same, because all of the motivations to do this kind of things for basically every urban area in the States, and now more and more across the Western world, is the same, is to reorient towards these specific types of itinerant, very mobile knowledge economy workers, and then reorient all city services to service economy to service them, which leaves out a whole strata of people who are of the city, who are looking for a place to live and not for a place to temporarily email from.
We used to be known for our cheap espressos, and now it's everywhere. It's like $10 lattes.
I've been looking a lot into terrorism ever since.
What a segue! Yes.
There's the dead center of Lisbon, the most centermost square. There was a bank there, and the bank closed, and they opened up a Subway.
Right.
Of course.
I don't know anyone who eats at Subway, so it's not for the Portuguese people.
Who's this for?
Yes.
We have better sandwiches at home.
And that's interesting, right? Because you'll kind of have this pitch where it's come to Lisbon. It's still very typical. There's still a lot of this culture, and then it's all Disneyland, right? It's all fake. It's all done for tourists and digital nomads and all that. But I think you made a good point where you were saying, it's obviously not the individual's fault. They're just following the normal incentives, but obviously they're the visible face of this change, right? And it's interesting because there's that quote about socialism of fools, and about the wrong targets and all that. But it's interesting how here the right wing are this is the good racism that the left has, right? You're being racist against these digital nomads and stuff like that. And we've actually had the guy from Liberal Initiative say that there's if you just change from from black person to investor, it sounds the same. It's the same kind of discrimination.
It's also funny, and I'd be interested to know how much this is the same there. And also giving you a red flag for a culture war you're probably going to get in another year or two, is that all of these kinds of urban reforms over the first part of the 21st century, here in New York, starting with Giuliani notoriously cleaned up Times Square and made it friendlier, and all of our development, we literally had a billionaire, Michael Bloomberg, for a mayor for a long time. All of the development in New York is to make it cleaner, more accessible, more attractive to investment, to these new kinds of industries, to tech and development. We fought for a while for the Amazon campus that was going to be here, and it was a minor scandal of how many concessions and how many tax breaks we were going to offer Amazon to open up a headquarters in New York. And yet, one of the current strains of culture we have is this absolute panic on the right wing that basically every liberal urban area in America is a war zone, where if you step outside, you're going to just get murdered immediately and stolen. And there's just even again in America, where we just here in New York, this month, legalized the sale of marijuana in 2 dispensaries citywide, that it is a disastrous drug pit of drug addicted homeless people at every street corner. And you'll see tweets by guys who live in Lubbock, Texas, being I would never take my family to New York. I would I would do group family suicide to save them from the depravity before I step foot into the island of Manhattan. And I'm I go out every day. It's fine. I live in Park Slope, New York, one of the nicest neighborhoods in the world. It's a higher density
Let me tell you that it's not going to get here in a year or two, because the mayor of Porto, the second city in Portugal, is already talking about it. Yeah. So we're going live.
Yeah, so it's interesting because you mentioned one of the 2 things you had heard about Portugal is that we decriminalized drugs.
Yes.
And that it worked, right? Yes. It had good result,
Porto's mayor doesn't agree, and he says we should
go
change it back.
Yeah, they're
should
seeing
get
too
them in
many
jail.
junkies on the street or
Yes.
something.
I'm sure that there are like sociological knock-on effects of that, but my understanding is like overall in terms of like safety, use, and the negative sociological effects of prohibition, that the trend has been largely positive in Portugal. Is that accurate?
So we used to have like both like an AIDS and an hepatitis, and all these intravenous diseases that you'd have, like contagious diseases. You used to have like those like as almost a pandemic, and those were like largely eliminated by these safe needle exchange programs and decriminalization. And,
Yeah, so just to give you an idea, I think that in 1991, it's said that every family had an heroin addict.
Yeah.
And then eventually became, like you said, an AIDS and hepatitis epidemic. And then in 2001, we decriminalized the use of drugs, and it became a public health issue and not a criminal issue.
Yes.
Yeah. It worked in every sense.
Yeah. So it's if a person is like found using, so to speak, right? Like they will be directed to the National Health Service. They will be directed to help, right? Like they won't be put in jail necessarily.
Yes.
Like it's still technically, I think, a crime to sell or to plant or to but the use is so it's like it's not and there's a lot of discussions here about like should we legalize it, should we keep it as it is. Like there's also these sorts of discussions, but like there's this guy in Portugal, the mayors are beautiful mayors. He wants to turn back the clock. He wants to
He hates
say stop.
Enough.
He hates drug addicts.
Enough. Yeah. He's an independent,
of course.
So he used to be, I think, social democrat, right? Yeah. Because basically we do have we have all these parties, but we have two big ones, right?
Yeah.
Like most European countries, and the PSD, the Social Democrats, are like the big center right one. So like all of our corrupt mayors, not all of them, but a big chunk. I would say like half, right? Half are like from the Socialist Party, half are from the. It's very democratic that way.
So the Socialist Party is basically the Democratic Party.
Yeah. You'd call that.
And the Social Democrats are the Republicans.
Yeah, but it's with all the caveats, right? Like
and they have to work in coalitions, I imagine, with other things. So there is actually some negotiation.
So
as opposed to us, where it's like it's the only game in town, and it's basically whatever says by the one of the two parties is basically what you get.
That's actually like a big issue, like in the left right now, because we did have a coalition government. I remember, I think I must have mentioned this. Like I remember like a Richard Wolff video or something where he was describing, like the socialists and the communists and the Greens, and like, well, he kind of, like they're not really socialists, so to speak. Like they're socialists in name, right? But he's describing this. So we had a coalition government. It electorally like did not go well for the other parties on the left, right? So they were kind of absorbed. Basically, what happened is they just said, "Oh, these guys are too irresponsible. Let us govern by ourselves," and they did get a majority. Right? Yeah. So like, there's this electoral question, like, should the left, be more open towards these coalitions, because you can get some concessions, but does it hurt them in the long run, basically?
Right.
Because you're not representing, like if they're the government, like whatever bad thing they do, they get hurt as well,
yes.
right? Yeah. So like, I don't know, like in the U.S., what's these issues are very different, I assume.
Yeah, I mean, it's because I guess in the media or the way that it might be portrayed online, that it in a weird way that there is this kind of pseudo coalition, even though it's not a parliamentary system, between the Democrats, which are represent the vast majority of quote unquote left leaning people, but would probably be like a center to center right party in any European country, and then the progressives or the left, who are the people who are actually pushing for more social democratic reforms. And it is the dynamic over and over, and we see this in the two Bernie campaigns, that it is the prerogative of the Democratic Party to crush or to eliminate, suppress, and destroy the left to almost a greater degree than it is to actually win against the right, because the left issues is a challenge to this, the entrenched issues and the bureaucratic mechanisms of this party, and the two parties more than anything like exist to perpetuate themselves, you know. So
and they kind of present a different kind of challenge, right?
Yeah.
Like if it's just like cultural issues, you know, they don't really have to, you know, argue on an economic basis, and like the more social democratic part will tend to do that, like for and that creates an uncomfortable challenge. It's the same here, right? Where they'll be like, well, you know, obviously you're preferable, like if you just, you know, like in pure utilitarian thing, obviously we don't want the right wing, and we don't want them, because they'll be in coalition with this Enough party or these
and then
liberals, right?
That is the thing that always works with us good the people on the left who really actually believe in something positive, to be like, well, look, if you don't do what we say, these crazy Enough guys are going to get in power and take over the party, and then it's going to be bad for everybody. So you got to take the most cautious line, the most the least progressing or left-leaning position, or else the conservatives, and that's basically the eternal dynamic in the Democrats here, is being like, look, we are going to do the absolute least because we believe it appeals to the absolute most, and in fact, by pushing for us to do more, you are wrecking our position over this insane revanchist right wing that holds that then effectively holds its hand on the tiller of what is possible in the country, like what the most insane right-wing people is. What that position is becomes the bargaining position against which the center-right, the Democrats, and then any left-wing position is, which is, you know, the eternally frustrating dynamic here. And it's also, you know, frustrating, like what we were trying to do with Bernie is like, maybe we can get just enough people to win in a Democratic primary to then topple the organizational top of the Democrats and actually change this thing, which is what Trump was able to do, even though Trump only brings with him
kind of like absorbed.
I mean, he brought a lot of his particular cultural insanity into the top rungs of the Republicans, and just by his sheer force of bizarre charisma and personality has made it so that no actual Republican, even the most like down the line corporate, I just want like whatever else is possible, I just want lower taxes on rich people. Now all of those people have to toe the line to the most insane cultural formations that have been unleashed by Trump. But he was actually able to kind of topple the organizational top of the Republican Party. But again, it's all within these two party structures that have been around for 150 years now. You know, as Matt would say, the biggest tragedy in American politics is that our party system formed before a labor movement, had any coherence here. So any labor movement that we had in like the later half of the 19th century and the 20th century had to conform to an existing party structure rather than create a new one.
You need to start beheading some people.
Yeah.
That's what we did here.
We love throwing people out the window in Portugal. That's a big
defenestration?
thing.
You're a big defenestration.
Defenestration.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's a big 30 years war thing too.
In
the Viceroy,
he was thrown out the window. So
okay, I think we're gonna probably run out here, but I gotta ask you one more thing. Just like my co-hosts, partially jokingly, partially not, have been pining for the possibility as we grope in the dark for new political formations that might reflect some possibility of change. They have been more and more joking about how the only solution in America might be a free officers movement, a kind of carnation revolution of our own. And I was just wondering, for you guys, how is that remembered in Portuguese history?
In a very romantic, non-revolutionary way, I think.
So
we didn't kill enough people.
So that was
always the problem. Too many compromises after the revolution.
We didn't execute enough people,
and
they came back.
Basically a lot of the people who are rich now were rich before, during the dictatorship, right? So do you know how Martin Luther King Jr. is depicted now, where you even have Republicans quoting him and stuff like that, right? So it has been defanged in many ways. So it is celebrated, right? It is one of the biggest, yearly holidays, and
like kind of like a national day.
Yeah, National Day. There's a parade. There's speeches. There's stuff like that. There's
you guys bust out a lot of
music
carnations
associated to it. we do get the carnations. A big day for the carnation people. Where they're selling the florists. They love it.
It's like the poppies with the English people, with the remembrance.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but now there's like this sort of like reactionary because we did have like a counter revolution 25th of November, so there's this like reactionary push to say you if you want to celebrate democracy, you should celebrate both, like the revolution and the counter revolution.
Yes.
Right, so like the crushing of the left basically. So we have that. It is so if you've I'm really sad that like Mike Duncan didn't continue, right? Because I would love to have heard like his take on.
Although I don't blame him, he worked on that thing for 9 years.
God, that's 9 years is a lot.
Would have liked more, but don't blame him for stepping away.
Oh no, not at all. But I was just going to say that it did follow the same structure where you would have, like you had this. First, it was just like a political revolution where it's like, well, this system is completely decrepit. Let's just change it, and then like kind of because a lot of the officers were not radicalized, not exactly the term, but they were leftists, right? So they started pushing in a certain direction of a social and economic revolution, like where there were the agrarian reforms and like all this like co-ops, like a lot of bosses just fled the country, so the workers reorganized into co-ops. Like my father was in one of those situations. Where basically
which side?
No, like his boss left and he said, "Well, I have to go to Brazil now. So
send them all to Brazil.
you guys just this is yours now." So that was he actually just handed it over.
Yeah,
so
when someone who has a relative in '74 who went to Brazil, what was he doing in Brazil?
Brazil, South Africa, Rhodesia. Yeah, there's some
certain red flag
places.
The
countries.
thing is, then the cultural information wars began.
Yeah.
And after all this took place, a lot of information started going like, oh, the communists are going to take your house. They're going to take your little garden.
The church was in on this as well. Yeah.
So there was a divide between the people who were trying to organize and the people freaking out that their houses were going to be taken away.
Communists are coming.
Yeah.
Communists are coming.
Yeah. So it's like a very sanitized version of it is like broadly celebrated. It is like it's interesting for me that like most countries have this. The people who really care about the past are like very reactionary normally, and like the leftists here, like they do have that period to cling back to where if only we could just make Portugal great again in that specific way,
I
kill more people.
Yeah, well,
I mean,
we have
you talk about reactionaries clinging to history, and I mean I do think that's interesting, and we can kind of go full circle about like why
we can wrap this.
Matt and I are interested in this, and I tend to find it a little tedious and pedantic to be like, what we're doing is, well, actually, you don't understand how, revolution, But, again, in culture wars that we will certainly almost export there. Although, again, this is a very particular one because we have this whole, like, battle over history going on now around this, like, hysteria over critical race theory, which is, basically a made-up academic. I mean, it's a real academic field, but brought into like a high school, it makes no sense to basically say like, oh, if you talk about the existence of like race-based oppression, like if you mention that once there were races that were oppressed here once I'm doing air quotes, then you're doing dangerous liberal ideology, and we need to ban that from schools. Like that's a big panic that's being fostered here. So it does feel like an acute moment to try to do what one can to try to get out. And again, what I was saying we're trying to do with the 30 Years War podcast is not like, try to bash people's head in with like some kind of, you need to orient your ideology this way, but just to tell a history in a compelling way, in the way that we as left-leaning people see it, to try to, again, try to get something out that's like, hey, maybe if this thing happened this way, maybe the next thing that we're going through can happen another way or a different way, or maybe it'll help you think about this. But that battle over how you see history is important, and it's But I think again, in my mind, the best way to get at it is to make the study of history fun and vibrant and funny in whatever dark way that you can make it, and just try to point out like the inherent absurdities of the revisionist right-wing arguments without being too, I don't know, even confrontational against it. Because when you get into an arguing match about, like, you know, whether X figure was good or bad, I think you're already in losing territory. You know.
Yeah, because then you're talking about, well, he actually he was an adulterer, or you know, like they'll just go into this weird.
Yeah, but if you lay things out, that's more like, hey, doesn't it make sense if you look at it this way? Maybe with a little like dialectical thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically what you're saying is leftists should find their own elector count or prince.
yes.
Archbishop. Right?
Hit the printing press, start wheeling out religious tracts that absolutely conform to the material interests of your elector prince while also claiming to have the mandate of heaven. And just blog, baby. Let's go.
That's, you know, podcasts are kind of a printing press kind of. Yeah, okay. So, Chris, thank you so much.
This was great. I enjoyed very much learning about what's going on in Portugal right now. Thank you guys so much for having me on.
If you ever want to relive cultural wars, come to Portugal.
Yes, like with a delay, right? If it's just like catching those, encore presentations.
I'll come visit sometimes with a list of all the ridiculous bullshit you guys can expect to encounter in the next like a year or so.
Okay, that would be great. So, you know, please check out Hell on Earth. It is in. You go to the Patreon. We'll just leave the link. You'll just find, you know, the Chapo Trap House Patreon. You can subscribe to it, and you'll have access to all the episodes. First one's free, so you can just go to the normal Chapo stream and you know, in all the normal places you'll find it. Thanks again.
Thank you guys so much. Bye.
E há 30 anos tudo canta. Esta desgraça, como é que eu hei de, como é que eu hei de, como é que eu hei de ir embora, minha gente? Toda pelada, lá foi embora, com a mão atrás, com a mão à frente. Como é que eu hei de, como é que eu hei de, como é que eu hei de ir embora, minha gente? Toda pelada, lá foi embora, com a mão atrás, com a mão à frente.